Hello, everyone. You are about to hear a brief retelling of the movie Fist of Legend, The Return of Cheng. Enjoy the movie. In the First World War, on the side of the Entente, 15,000 Chinese participated. Among them was the national hero Cheng. Together with his comrades in arms, he found himself in France in 1917. At some point, the French fled the battlefield and the Chinese were left alone on the barricades. The Germans went at them hand to hand, but Master Kung Fu chopped them into cabbage with a bayonet knife in a few seconds. The Chinese were happy to be saved, but suddenly one of them was shot in the forehead. The others panicked, but Cheng went into berserk mode and ran toward the machine gunner with 3 knives. Not forgetting to dodge bullets, performing a few circus tricks, Cheng flew on a wire to the building and threw a knife at the gunner. With the other 2 knives, he climbed the wall of the building like a climber. Cheng climbed through the window and introduced the Germans to Eastern martial arts. The foolish ones had forgotten where the trigger on the weapon was, and so they were slaughtered with their hands and chopped into meat with the knives. That's how Cheng defeated everyone and the Chinese ran home. Not much time passed and already China itself began to suffer from the aggression of the Japanese Empire. Shanghai, 1925. Local authority Lewis and other gangsters came to his establishment. He argues that the more chaos in the country, the richer they are. China doesn't belong to the Chinese anyway. They'll be ruled by either the Japanese or the British. The main star Kiki first sang a song in Chinese and then in Japanese for important guests from the land of the rising sun, but then she was interrupted by a pianist who turned out to be Cheng, and to spite the Japanese he performed the British anthem. Lewis offered to let the veteran stay at his hotel. Kiki is his favorite of all mistresses, and Cheng is one of the leaders of the underground resistance movement. He gets close to Lewis because they need the help of any Chinese man in the fight against the Japanese, even if it will be a bandit, especially such an influential one. Cheng returned to China under the name of the murdered soldier Tian'an because he had to hide after he killed a Japanese general 10 years ago. The Japanese headquarters is in the dojo where General Takeshi teaches karate to his soldiers. 3 officers are responsible for the interception. One of them opened his mouth and was immediately killed by a blow to the apple of his eye. Takeshi also finished off the others with a couple of punches and informed the karateka that Japanese soldiers should be ready to die at any moment. While spying on the Chinese army general's mistress, the invaders learned where the warlord was hiding and prepared to attack him. Together with General Zen in the apartment was the general of the People's Army Zhou. They expect each other to stab in the back because they are fighting for power inside China. Zhou is the one without a mustache, hopes that Zen will stop flirting with the Japanese, otherwise they will have to meet on the battlefield next time. Cheng guessed that the Japanese had dressed up as bums and were waiting for the general on the street. He also saw a masked Avenger costume in the window. This movie is just premiering in the city. General Zen approached the car and at that moment the Japanese agents opened fire. A firefight began, all the general's wounds were broken, but just then the masked hero arrived. The first Japanese he immediately sent into a coma, and the rest began to break no less hard. Cheng moved so fast that the enemies again did not have time to remember their pistols, and in a minute they were all unconscious on the asphalt. But the last Japanese fleeing immediately opened fire on the Chinese policeman. The cowardly inspector found 24 bodies on the ground and ordered his subordinates to find the living among them. Black Mask brought General Zen to safety and warned him against alliance with the Japanese. Takeshi hoped to nail Zen and blame it on General Zhou and thus ignite a civil war in China. But they were thwarted by some very strong fighter, and now they need to find out who he is. The hero's rumor went all over Shanghai. They even printed about him in the newspapers. The inspector decided to take the merits of Cheng to himself. But the chief said that he is more like a boar in a mask, not a hero, and called the inspector a stupid idiot. The guy shares information with Cheng for money. He tells him everything he knows about the general's attackers. In the club Lewis works for Japanese spy Huan Yun. She reported that the institution has a new co-owner, a suspicious type who recently returned from France. Works for the Japanese singer Kiki. However, unlike the first spy, she did not say anything sensible, but since she is more sympathetic, the first received a face. Cheng builds himself a business sausage and constantly harasses visitors. He makes connections and looks for new acquaintances who can become their allies. Once the star wanted to hang out with Cheng Yam, and he brought her to a poor neighborhood to introduce her to his frontline friends. The men treated the woman to moonshine and memorialized Chen Xenyum, who died in the war. Kiki remembers that hero, but he was supposed to be executed for killing the general. After the drinking, the poor had a mass dance to the accordion. On the way home, a drunken Kiki dropped her purse, from which a gun fell out. Suddenly she pointed the gun at Chen and demanded to know who he was, but then she turned it into a joke. She managed to steal a front photo. At headquarters, the Japanese are planning how they'll plunder China, and they'll start with the most valuable relics. From the main headquarters came a list of 100 names, those who should be executed for openly opposing Japan, and to sow panic among the people, they let the leak. The list of patriots was published in the newspaper. There were also Americans, a Frenchman, and an Englishman. Some important Japanese came to the club and demanded to bring the girls. Kiki approached them and said that today no Chinese girl will not entertain the Japanese. The impending scandal was averted by Chen Zhen. The general ran the information and found out that the manager was hiding under a false name. They talked about the masked hero, and Takeshi offered to make a bet: who will be more, those who will be executed or who will be saved by the masked man. They almost got into a fight, but Lewis showed up and made enemies. Reporters burst into the club and asked for comment on the death list. The Japanese wanted to start a war, then Takeshi hugged Lewis to show the friendship between China and Japan. Louis now looks like a traitor. Chen called out to Takeshi and threw him a spiked ring that was on one of the dead Japanese agents. Almost every day, opponents of the Japanese occupation began to die in Shanghai. Some are blown up, others are simply shot. Who manages to save the masked hero and destroys the Japanese killers themselves? In any case, there are more and more victims. Many have to leave the country to save their lives. Some even have to be forced out of town. Kids started imitating the folk hero. Once shouted for the Japs to get out of here, but he himself was taken out of line. Huang did it personally. Chen and the singer eventually fell in love. The Japanese broke into the editorial building that served as the headquarters of the resistance. Chen came to the guerrillas' defense. Chen wanted to save his friend, but he didn't have time, and General Takeshi's brother killed the man. He was immediately overtaken by the Shanghai-style revenge. The hero tested the Japanese man's bones or the furniture. Both broke. The entire newsroom staff was killed. The general was also informed of his brother's death. Chen Zheng, with the help of his super memory, remembered who was behaving suspiciously in the club, and it was Huan. Chen also realized that his girlfriend was using cigarettes to pass important information to the Japanese, and she doesn't even smoke. Chen told Kiki that he uncovered her and knows that she is working for the Japanese. After this conversation, Chen Zhen was knocked out in the street, and her friend Wei Wei, the mistress of the Chinese general, was dragged to the singer. Takeshi reveals the spy. She is not Kiki, but Officer Yumi Yamaguchi. She's Japanese. To test the spy's loyalty, he has her stab her friend to death. Chen was captured by the Japanese and tortured. He was rescued by an inspector and his friends from the front. The veterans overpowered the headquarters guards and grabbed explosives and ran into the building. There they began to cut the sleeping Japanese right in their beds. Takeshi stopped the electrocution. He said that 10 years ago a Chinese man killed his father in the dojo. Meanwhile, resistance fighters began pelting the headquarters with grenades. As the siren sounded, Takeshi ordered Chen to be released. He would fight him one-on-one to avenge his father's death. The Chinese destroyed the headquarters along with a bunch of Japanese soldiers, and the entire squad climbed into one car. The last explosive planted helped them escape. They threw Cheng naked out of the car. And all the front comrades were caught by the Japanese and executed after torture. Students went on a demonstration against the interventionists on the bridge. They were stopped by an inspector with a squad of police. A Japanese with a pistol got into the crowd of Chinese. He opened fire. There was panic and a fight between the police and students. The youths had to be arrested. At the station, the inspector was run over by an Englishman and finally lost his nerve. The Englishman is always taking bribes. With this, they nailed him and then let all the students go. Cheng finally woke up and found out that all his friends were outnumbered. Zen believed his mistress was killed by General Zhou, so he allied himself with the Japanese army. General Zhou and his wife were killed, and the army was defeated. Louis offered Chen to surrender. The war was already lost. Kiki showed up in military uniform to her former employer and lover. If he didn't give Cheng up, General Takeshi would brutally mop up the area, but the gangster didn't cooperate and shot the Japanese. Cheng was left alone. He put on the snow-white suit and walked the streets of the city with the Japanese spy. He showed up at the dojo just as Takeshi wanted him to. The general talked about the greatness of Japan and then stabbed Kiki with his katana for showing sympathy for the enemy. Chen angrily turned one officer into a chop and made sure he never had any more children. The karate came from all sides and attacked Chen, but he began to destroy one enemy after another with his legs. Scared Japanese grabbed the sticks, but they were still afraid to approach this kung fu machine, and then Chen took out his pants nunchaku and the Japanese became quite painful. Chen himself doesn't pay any attention to the sticks. After running over the heads, he flew above the crowd and broke the skull of the most unlucky one. All the karateka were killed like flies. Chen shouted that China rules and Japan sucks. Takeshi ordered them to stop, even though no one was eager to fight. The crippled fighters left the dojo. General Takeshi finally decided to show the power of Japanese karate. Quite quickly, he lowered his opponent to the floor and then began to break the dojo with his limbs. A hard punch to the jaw sent the Chinese fighter into a knockdown. Takeshi added a leg kick and Chen found himself on his shoulder blades. He was flooded with flashbacks. Chen came to his senses and showed off his muscles. The Japanese man had nothing to show off and stayed in his kimono. Kung Fu East pinned his enemy against the wall and began to work on him like a pear, remembering all the evil the Japanese villain had done. While Takeshi was falling, Chen gave him a dozen blows to the head, and the last one broke his neck. After recovering from the fight, Chen puts his mask back on to continue destroying his enemies, and the first thing he will do is to take revenge on the spy Huan Yun.